Thanks, everyone. So hopefully you're not sick of this topic already, because we've had a talk so far on platforms and developer empathy. So I'm hopefully going to tell you something a little bit different to what they have, because I've sort of smushed the two together here. So that's fun. So I went to a conference recently, not this one, about a month ago. Here are the lovely people I went with. It's DevOps Days London. I see people in the audience who went there as well. so there are some overlap there. For those who haven't been, it is a series worldwide, so this was just the London version. Technical conferences covering software development, IT operations, intersection between them. It was my first DevOps-style conference. So it was really exciting. We had the usual talks in the morning, really cool talks, not just on the technical side of things or the process side of things, but also the people. What I really enjoyed the most, though, was the open spaces. So in the afternoon, they have a chance to put forward topics. So anyone who's attended can go, I would like to talk about this. Everyone votes on it, puts their hands up, say, I want to go to that one. The ones that are most successful get you get let loose on them, so everyone can go into the room and have a completely free-form conversation about the topic. I picked one, which I'm going to talk to you about, and it was around platform engineering, best practices, what worked and what didn't. It wasn't a small room, but it was really busy. Unfortunately, this isn't it. We couldn't get a photo of this one. This was one on product management. But the room was full. I had to come in and sit on the floor because I was too late. They'd run out of chairs. And because I'm not a platform engineer, spoiler, product manager, I went into listening mode. I got my book out. I started writing stuff down, basically trying to understand what the platform engineers thought. And that was my face at the end of it. I was really confused because what I heard wasn't what I was expecting at all. I was hearing things like, things were good before we started scaling. The devs now have no idea what they're doing. Developers need clear guardrails, otherwise they break things. They just ignore the platform and do whatever they want, whenever they want. And I have to help our developers with everything. It's so tiring. And I was like, this sucks. This isn't a nice way to think about our application developers, the people using our platform. And what sort of surprised me the most is none of these things came from anger or resentment. It was very much frustration. There were sort of two modes in the room. So you had the first one, which was developers are complete cowboys who do whatever they want, and they don't give a damn about the business context or rules that we have in place. The other side was their toddlers who haven't got a clue about what they're doing, and they need hand-holding the entire time, and they're all idiots. So then that made me think, why are platform engineers so frustrated by their users? I've worked in a lot of projects before, and this is the most frustrated group of developers I've worked with, which is saying something. And I was a dev for the first 2 or 3 years of my career. Does that mean that I'm a toddler? So I took my toddler hat with pride and decided that I was going to find out the answer to this question. But before I immediately jumped into that, I thought, let's go back. I've worked on platforms for a little while now. Did I always feel like this too? Is this new? So go back to the heady days of 2019. You were allowed to go out wherever you wanted. It's pre-pandemic. This was my first platform role. I was working with an incredibly experienced team of brilliant people. So there were some really hardcore sysadmins. There were infrastructure wizards. There were consultants like myself. And we were working on a platform that was on-prem, and it didn't work. So it took 3 months to onboard anyone. It was really unreliable. No one liked it. No one liked on-prem. We needed to modernize. We were going to rebuild. We chose Azure because it was a Microsoft stack that they were working with. We wanted to build everything in support. And like I said, we were a new team that had been brought together, so we went requirement gathering. No one knew what we were going to build first, so we were sensible. We spoke to the business. We spoke to the governance team, the compliance team, the security team. We spent a lot of time talking to the developers. And we gave an estimate to build this new platform in Azure of 3 months. 18 months later, we had this beautiful platform. It was in Azure. It looked pretty much exactly the same as the old one, except the business was loving it because you could onboard customers, as many as you wanted, in minutes, not the months it took previously. So everyone was happy, right? These were our devs. Oh, you can't see it very clearly, but imagine that's a shiny glass building. that they're looking at there. That's what they'd been promised. They'd been promised the cloud. And we've been doing incremental rollouts as we went of functionality, but because it was a bit of a monolith, it took them 18 months before they could have anything that worked, that they could use in anger. And unfortunately for them, what they got looked exactly like what they had before, only worse, because now they had to change YAML pipelines before they could get any resources. So we hadn't done a brilliant job. What had been a successful platform for the business was not a successful platform for our developers. So I spoke to the people that worked with me on that project again and asked them, what was it like supporting it? Because I rolled off once it had been delivered. What was it like living with the developers? And they said some things that seemed quite familiar, which had me a bit like that. So I was confused before, and I was stunned now. So I'd realized I'd asked the wrong question. I shouldn't have asked, why are platform engineers so frustrated by their users? I should have asked, why are platform engineers still so frustrated by their users? It's been 4 years. Why has nothing changed? And I'm assuming it's not because they're all working with me and I haven't learned anything. We're building value for the business, right? But are we building value for our users, the people that are using these systems day to day? Maybe not. So, product manager, like I said, I've come up with some scientific sounding but not scientific proved hypotheses that I'm going to walk through you, and hopefully you agree with them. Hypothesis 1. Moving from DevOps to platform engineering has created an empathy gap. Now, I have this slide on empathy, and I think Kunal did a better job of describing it than I ever could in his keynote yesterday. But for those who couldn't attend, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And it's a big part of design thinking, is having empathy for your users. But what I found is, while empathy often starts out good, you talk to your developers, you have really best intentions here, it can sour really quickly. So think about someone you love, like your sibling, who has asked you 1,000,000 times to do something for them that you know they can do themselves. Your empathy starts to wane. Your best friend, who has told you 1,000,000 times the same problem that they have and do not listen to you when you tell them what they can do to fix it, the empathy gap grows. And these are people you love and have known for decades, so you're going to get really annoyed with your users much faster than you are with someone you love. So that's where we start with this. Why I think DevOps has facilitated this more? It allowed you to work hand in hand with your application users as an operation person. The feedback loops are microscopic here. You're working in the same team. You're talking to each other on a daily basis. But as you scale, you require more ops people for every application team that you want to roll out. That sounds fine, sort of. It's a linear scaling. But the real crux of the problem with this one is you can't move teams easily. You're building yourself n number of infrastructure platforms based on however many teams you decide to roll up. That's a reuse of assets. That's a reuse of knowledge. If you've got a specific security policy, you're going to implement that however many times up here, every time you do DevOps. So we thought, OK, how do we scale it? Platform engineering. We move them away a little bit, but that one person can build something that's close enough to what works for each of these teams. You get a slightly longer feedback loop, but you're building pretty much the same thing for each of them, right? Developers just need some storage, some compute. It's all the same. That's where the gap forms. So here are the gaps. And with each team you onboard, you get more of those gaps, and the gaps get bigger as you try to create something generic for everyone. Like, it's really natural that this happens. It's really hard to give as much empathy to all of these people when you're dealing with so many of them. And to illustrate that, I've got a story about Monty. So this is my Monstera Monty. During lockdown, I moved into a new build flat. White walls, big glass windows. It was very stale, so I got a plant. I really loved him, and it might have been because it was lockdown, but also he's a lovely plant. I would sit there making sure he had the right moisture levels in the water. I was counting the number of holes he had in his leaves, being really proud every time I saw a new growth. He sparked a little bit of something in me. So I got some more plants. And I still had enough space and capacity and empathy for all of them at this point. I loved them all. I thought they were all wonderful. So I got some more plants. And as you get more plants, you end up having a little less time for each of them. And at this point, as you can see, I stopped treating them with as much love as I might have before. This is potting day, where everyone gets a slightly bigger pot and everyone gets fed. So they do it all together now, but it's close enough, they're fine. And eventually it gets to a silly point. This is my bathtub. Now everyone gets watered together, whether they like it or not. And the good thing about empathy for plants is they don't have a choice in the matter. They can't go anywhere. They have to put up with the watering schedule I put them on. They have to put up with the amount I feed them. They don't have legs. Application developers have legs. They have choice. They don't have to use your platform. You can make them. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Right now. So the larger the empathy gap, the lower adoption of your platform. And why this one is important is adoption is different to usage. Software usage is just logging on. You're not really engaging with something. You're not getting the benefit or the value out of it. Adoption is where you start leveraging the platform or leveraging the software to its maximum effect. You're reaping the benefits. You're contributing back. You're helping that platform grow. So just using a platform isn't enough. And if you try to mandate it and say, hey, you have to use my pipelines, you have to use my platform, then people, they will, but they're not going to get the benefits from it. They're not going to get the full adoption from it. So some stories to prove that. So this is Big Energy Corp. And Big Energy Corp had a giant monolithic infrastructure. And it had this monolithic infrastructure because it had been built over years and years and years with very similar requirements. And then green energy came along and kind of messed that up, and they needed to change a lot. But their infrastructure didn't. It was really hard to use, and that gap meant that teams would use it as infrequently as possible. And I'm talking like they would request massive, massive changes all in one go that would take months to do, that were totally over-provisioned, and that's what they would use. That would be it. They would never request any changes because they knew it would take so long. They had like their architecture, like the application architecture was really poor at this point. They weren't using microservices like they wanted to. They were bundling it all together, which meant it was hard to change, and they weren't getting as much value. So they lagged behind the curve on the green energy. It was not great for them. Maybe great for the planet. The second story is an education firm. They would have these massive blackouts of their AWS account. For example, their CTO left the business, and there was something that went wrong. It went down. And that is the point in time they realized that the CTO was the only one with the AWS master password, and no one could change anything. A few days later, they did get it back and up and running, but that was a 3 to 4 day outage that they had that could very easily have been avoided. So devs couldn't rely on it. So that was the empathy gap there. What it meant for adoption is devs would build their own environments, like completely from scratch. So they had loads and loads of AWS accounts dotted around the business, paid for by the product. Like, so product management would buy this account separately for their product just so they could get things out quicker. So this company had the worst of both worlds. They had a platform that didn't work, and they were paying for AWS. Absolute madness. And the third one is a neobank. So they had a lot of regulation. They needed to make sure that every change was provided with an audit trail. Cool. But they automated it in a really half-hearted way. So some of the changes would be fine, and some required a lot of manual intervention by other teams to approve the pull request or to update the Jira ticket, which is how they did it. What it meant was that the engineers working on this platform, instead of pushing changes through that were matching the ticket, they would bundle in a bunch of bugs as well so that they didn't have to go through this pull request process, which meant your audit was completely mismatched to what you actually were saying was in there. Not great. So you ended up with this inconsistent, slow process, which had a low adoption because it had so many workarounds. These aren't my stories. I went to the pub with one developer friend and asked him to tell me about the platforms he'd used. He came up with these in less than half a pint. And I'm not saying that he is an absolute cowboy. He's the kind of developer that would very happily not touch any infrastructure or do any platform work because he wants to be working on user value. So these are, I don't think, unique stories to him. I think this is a trend across the industry. So that's, be careful of the big empathy gaps. You will get low adoption from it. And then this is the final one, which might be a bit of a jump, but my third hypothesis is platforms with low adoption will fail. And this was brought up quite well in Francesca's and Nicolo's talk yesterday, if you saw it, around the platform problem. It isn't a tech problem. If you don't have users on your platform, what is the point of building one? Why have you done it? And I think before we dig into that, it's worth thinking about what does a successful platform actually look like? What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve? And I mentioned earlier that I was a consultant. So I would ask this question a lot. And before, I would get two answers. So one would make me a little bit scared, and it would be a list of features. But after a bit of digging, you would get to the same as the second answer, which was some outcomes that they expected the platform to give them. And these would be things like, I want to reduce the amount of time developers are spending talking to my security or my governance teams. I want to make it cheaper or more visible to see what happens on my platform and on my infrastructure. And I found that as people were talking to me, they jumped into three categories. So the cheaper one, which I just mentioned, and for those things you'd get asked things like, I want to limit the reuse of different assets. I want more predictability in my platform. I want to reduce my cloud spend because it's crazy expensive. Second would be quicker. You want devs to spend less time writing tickets to ops, less time messing about with pipelines, more time working on valuable functionality for your end users. And the last one's safer. So this is, I want it governable. I want my platform to be secure. I want to make sure that I know when a developer makes a change that it's going to be accurate in what I expect it to be. So these were the three buckets that things fell into. But none of them matter if your developers are not using your platform as intended, if they are not adopting your platform. As I showed in those stories I spoke about previously, you need to have good adoption of your platform to get any of those benefits. And this is quite a tricky one to measure, because you could just say, oh, yeah, you have to, it's mandated. But then you're not going to get any of those benefits out of it, because devs will find a way to break whatever you tell them to use. So they have to want to use it. So just to reiterate, because I think this one's really important, without developers adopting your platform, you do not have a successful platform. So I've shared three hypotheses. One, moving from DevOps to platform engineering has created an empathy gap. Two, the larger the empathy gap, the lower your platform adoption. And three, platforms with low adoption are doomed to fail. So my conclusion is platforms with a large empathy gap will also fail. So maybe you're asking now, Kat, that's cool. How do I do that? How do I stop that platform empathy gap? Well, product management. So the first things I want you to do is to think of your application developers or your users. This is probably the first pitfall that I made as a platform product owner, was I assumed that everything I needed to build would be for the absolute end consumer of the product that my developers building stuff was for. It made sense, right? We should be thinking about the end users. They're the ones that are getting value out of it. That was a big failure because it means you do not focus on the adoption of your platform. Something that you build that is useful for those end customers might help the business. It won't help the app developers, so they won't use your platform. You've got to think of them as a proxy step. So it is important, don't forget about it, but also remember who you're actually building the platform for. The second corollary to this is the forcing point that I've mentioned a few times. If you force people to use your platform, you won't get any meaningful learning from it. And that's really, really important in building a growth cycle and making more people want to use your platform, is learning what works and learning what doesn't. And I think you can do this by treating application developers as users. The first real producty one here that is going to be a little bit, maybe a term you've not heard before, is define a North Star metric. And a North Star metric is used for having a single activity that encapsulates success for your platform or your product. It's used at companies like Google for prioritization, and Amplitude, which is a product analytics company, have written a whole playbook on the North Star framework. And it is thoroughly about picking one thing that shows success in your product. So here's a definition that I've taken from an article at Product School. Yep, there's a Product School. So a North Star metric condenses down everything your product is really aiming to do above all other functions. It holds you accountable. It focuses what you're doing, and it helps you see that you're heading in the right direction. So an example of a North Star metric might be someone clicking a play button on a YouTube video. So that might be the North Star for YouTube, or someone building a playlist on Spotify. It often goes hand in hand with a team vision. So if you've got one of those, brilliant. If you don't, make one. There are plenty of articles on it, better than I can tell you in a talk right now. That's a whole thing in itself. The second part of this is make it related to adoption. So I've sort of advocated that adoption of your platform is really, really important to building a successful platform. That's why I think adoption should be the North Star metric for your platform. It's going to be unique to whatever platform you're building. And think of it as what are the signs that someone is using your platform, not because they have to, but because they want to. For example, things might be a certain number of service requests, so not just one, maybe multiple, maybe with a certain amount of configuration in them. Maybe it's the complexity of changes that someone's raised in your PR for your YAML. Could be Jira tickets. I don't know what your platform looks like, but make it related to yours and specific and change over time as you grow your platform as well. Something to consider here is you want to make sure that it is directly measurable, and that measure is related to any change that you make. So if you make a change to your platform, you want to be able to see that change very quickly in your North Star metric. They're called leading metrics. They are much, much easier to see the impact of, and they can be quite hard to find because the big picture ones are much easier to think about. So you've got your metric. It's related to adoption. Now you can start thinking about why don't people use your platform? And this is something that I don't think gets enough time to think about. You're always thinking about the next fun new feature and what's the next benefit that someone's going to get out of it. But as a platform team, you have a very limited customer base. You are not building the next Facebook. You don't have a 7 billion person marketplace to deal with here. You have maybe 100 application developers, 1,000 if you're a really big company, but that's a very finite set. So you need to be thinking about the people that aren't adopting your platform almost as much as what helps the people that are. And I've seen 3 reasons why people don't adopt platforms. There are probably more, but these are 3 that I see all the time. The top one, it isn't valuable. So if the platform doesn't do what people need to do in a significantly improved way of what they've got already, they're not going to want to use it. It's not just about providing features that work, it's about providing them in a way that people want to use them. So it's providing the right level of abstraction, the right level of configurability, the way someone can actually get their job done. Think here, user interviews, shadowing, process analysis, follow what people do in their day-to-day lives, see what works, see what's painful. The second one is usable. If your platform is hard to use, people won't. So those examples I gave about the North Star metrics before, they're not the most usable, user-friendly way of doing it. So think about what you could do to make it better. Also under this one, people have an expectation of how they want to request things. There is a demand now in this modern age. You can't get away with paper and pen anymore. They want things to be consistent and self-service. So people need to be able to request something themselves, not have you in the way, and have it be done on a schedule that is reasonable. So if it's going to take it a week to do, it's better to say up front that will take a week than to have something that may be 5 minutes and maybe a month's time, because then people don't have any predictability. The third one is both. And this one, it can be to more or less degrees, but if it isn't valuable and it isn't usable, then you've got a double whammy. So think about all those 2, and then also try and prioritize which one's the biggest driver. Is it because it's not valuable, or is it because people can't use it in the first place? So to summarize some of those thoughts is you as platform engineers, and I don't know if all of you are, but you're frustrated due to the platform empathy gap. The large empathy gap means a lower adoption of your platform. Bridging that gap and making adoption your North Star metric will help you close that gap. And think about and fix those reasons why people don't adopt your platform, rather than trying to think about how people will. Thank you very much. I've been Kat.